Chapter 126, Face Smacking. Haiyang, look, what did Jian Yun say? She was not polite to me? She actually dares to speak to me like this. Mrs. Xu was so angry that her entire body trembled. Jian Yun's strength made her not dare to curse anymore, but she could not swallow this anger, and could only cry to her own son. Jian Yun, how can you speak to my mother like this? Xu Haiyang also frowned. He loved Jian Yun and also loved his mother. He could not bear to see his mother suffer. What did I say? Did I scold her or humiliate her? Jian Yun closed the door of the ward. She was really annoyed now, and hated Xu Haiyang even more. She smiled coldly and looked at Lin Rong and Lin Lanlan with disdain. On the other hand, you guys keep saying that you are home tutoring. Then I would like to ask you all, destroying other people's families and having an illegitimate daughter enter the house, is it because you have a home tutoring? Also, my mother just came out of the intensive care ward and you guys rushed over to cause trouble. Could this be your home tutoring? Jian Yun really did not want to talk about these private matters in such an occasion, but since these people were shameless, then she did not care. Mrs. Xu was speechless, but she was used to being forceful. How could she swallow her anger like this? She immediately retaliated. My son's money was taken away from the card. You said you didn't want it, so you didn't want it? What a joke. You didn't want my son's money. You're just a woman. How can you afford the medical fees of the ICU 1 to 20,000 a day? Mom, what nonsense are you talking about? Xu Haiyang desperately tried to pull Mrs. Xu's arm, but the more Mrs. Xu said, the more pleased she became. Jian Yun, I did not agree that Xu Haiyang would find you as a girlfriend back then. Today, I will put my words here and you will not be able to enter my Xu family's door in the future. Mrs. Xu said in contempt. Mom. Xu Haiyang could not stop Mrs. Xu. He hurriedly looked at Jian Yun. Yun Duo, don't listen to my mom. I never thought so. Where did your son's money go? I don't know. Jian Yun sneered. As for your Xu family, do you think your family is a wealthy family? She did not even look at Xu Haiyang. She said to the two policemen, Mr. Police, this is a hospital after all. These people are making a scene here and have affected other patients. Why don't we talk somewhere else? No need. It's about time. The two policemen put away the notebook, took out the handcuffs, and walked to Lin Rong's side. One of the policemen handcuffed her hands without any explanation, while the other policeman said very formally, Lin Rong, now that we suspect that you've deliberately killed someone, come with us. Lin Rong's hands were handcuffed and she immediately became paralyzed. She did not even have the strength to stand, especially when she was accused of such a crime. This was the result that she did not expect at the beginning. Lam. Lin Lanlan was also anxious and quickly chased after him. But she did not dare to snatch someone from the police and could only comfort Lin Rong. Mom, don't worry, I will get you a lawyer now. The few of you also come with us to take a statement. The police pointed at the security guards, Xu Haiyang and the rest. Then they said to the doctors and nurses, we have memorized your contact details. Later, we might need to ask you to go to the Public Security Bureau to prove what you saw today. No problem, we will cooperate. The doctors and nurses nodded. The police said to Jian Yun, Jian Yun, you also need to go to the Public Security Bureau. But my mother is now. Jian Yun was anxious when she heard this. Her mother had just come back from the gates of hell. She did not know what the current situation was. How could she leave at this time? Don't be anxious. We understand the situation. The government is not unreasonable. Give us the contact information and come back after you settle the matters here. The policeman said pleasantly. It's not fair. Why can she not go? Lin Lanlan and Mrs. Xu angrily refuted. The policeman's face darkened. You gathered together to cause trouble and dared to question the law. With his hat pinned down, Lin Lanlan and Mrs. Xu did not dare to speak anymore. At this time, Jian Yun suddenly realized that Bai Zhe had gone somewhere. She had just seen him on the phone, and now Jian Yun was burning with anxiety. She had been thinking about what Bai Zhe said about the second surgery and did not realize that the atmosphere was changing at the moment. Isn't that the hospital director? And Senior Yin? Why are they here? The nurses and doctors suddenly looked at each other. Jian Yun heard their discussion and subconsciously looked over. She saw a man in his 50s who was wearing a white coat walking over. Beside him was an old man who was also wearing a white coat. Behind them were Bai Zhe and a few younger doctors. Director Li, hello. One of the policemen knew the man in his 50s and went up to greet him. However, Director Li only shook hands with him and immediately smiled apologetically. He quickly walked towards Jian Yun and the others. He reached out his hand from far away and smiled. General Manager Huo, why didn't you say anything in advance when you came? How could you be so wrong to stay in the ward? Director Li. Huo Liancheng, who had been standing behind Jian Yun the whole time, stretched out his hand expressionlessly, but only touched Director Li's hand and withdrew it as a greeting. That Director Li did not mind. He hurriedly called Huo Liancheng to the office to take a seat. No need. Huo Liancheng continued to refuse. Dean Li was embarrassed. After all, there were many young doctors and nurses here. He had been humiliated by Huo Liancheng again and again. He could not help but feel a little embarrassed. Even so, he did not leave. Instead, he stood beside Huo Liancheng and spoke to him with a smile. When everyone saw this scene, they could not help but be secretly shocked. Each and every one of them began to guess Huo Liancheng's identity. He actually made the director of the largest hospital in Qinghu City treat him respectfully. However, the very old man who appeared here like the stars surrounding the moon also spoke to Huo Liancheng with a kind smile. He even patted Huo Liancheng's shoulder very intimately. This scene shocked everyone so much that they were speechless. Because anyone who had watched television would recognize this old man. He was the ace doctor in Qinghu City's first hospital. He had a family background and was a national treasure-level old doctor. It was as hard as ascending to heaven to hang his name. It was said that his name was already 2 years later. Recently, he had a program in Qinghu City television that specialized in healthcare. Once the program was broadcast, it was unusually popular. General Manager Huo, why didn't you come to our hospital to chat with Warren? Is it because our small hospital is too shabby that you, the big CEO, don't take it seriously? Senior Yin looked at Huo Liancheng with a smile. His hair was white, but his face was red and shiny. His eyes were kind, but he was not angry. It made people respect him. Grandpa Yin. Huo Liancheng pulled the corner of his mouth and ignored Senior Yin's teasing. He held Zhan Yun's hand and continued to introduce her to Senior Yin expressionlessly. My girlfriend, Zhan Yun. Chapter 127. He turned out to be Huo Huo. On the way, Senior Yin had already heard about what had happened here from Baizhe. Because Baizhe was troubled by Ouyang Fei's condition, he called Dean Li to invite Dean Li Chengfeng, who was an authority in this area, to come over. It just so happened that Senior Yin was with Dean Li, and he also heard about it. Someone's making trouble here, so we came together. Huo Liancheng's introduction surprised Senior Yin. He turned to look at Jian Yun, and his eyes lit up. What a beautiful girl. General Manager Huo, you have good taste. Grandpa Yin, you should call me Liancheng. Huo Liancheng was speechless by Senior Yin's exaggerated expression. He pulled Jian Yun to his side and did not waste any time. He gestured to the ward. Stop talking nonsense. Go and see my future mother-in-law. Mother-in-law, did the young lady agree to marry you? Senior Yin was speechless. Huo Liancheng looked at him, but he did not dawdle. He asked Director Li and Baizhe to enter the ward together. Let's go. Huo Liancheng put his arm around Jian Yun's shoulder and followed her in. Jian Yun knew that Huo Liancheng came from a prominent family, but she did not expect him to know the hospital director and Yin Guoshou. But now was not the time to think about this. She was very nervous, afraid that even Senior Yin and the others would sentence her mother to death. Senior Yin and Director Li carefully examined Ouyang Fei. Their faces were a little solemn. They asked Baizhe some questions, and the few of them kept saying some professional terms. Jian Yun could not understand. Huo Liancheng held her hand tightly and comforted her silently. But compared to the silence in the ward, the outside of the ward seemed to have exploded. His surname is Huo Liancheng. Why is this name so familiar? A young nurse scratched her head. I heard that the new president of the Ming family is surnamed Huo. Could it be him? Another young nurse stared at Huo Liancheng's back with a look of infatuation, her eyes full of happiness. You mean he is Huo's husband? That is the successor of the Huos? The nurse from before shouted excitedly, but she immediately covered her mouth and smiled at the 2 policemen and the few patients who came out of the other wards in embarrassment. Yes. His name is Huo Liancheng, the nurse said. I have seen his financial interview. He is a handsome man. I didn't expect him to be even more handsome in real life. The nurses were all infatuated with Huo Liancheng. They could not move their eyes away from Huo Liancheng. A few nurses who were more familiar with Zhan Yun deliberately mocked Mrs. Xu. By the way, just now, who said that Zhan Yun could not afford to pay the ICU room fees? President Huo is so rich, it is not a problem for him to buy 10 of our hospitals in one go. Zhan Yun does not care about the 1 or 200,000. That's right. Huo family's assets are all over the world. General Manager Shan Huo's assets earned by setting up his own business are just a few streets away from our so-called wealthiest. To him, the assets worth more than 1,200,000 were nothing. It's like we saw a penny drop on the ground. A few nurses started talking and discussing. They even glanced at Mrs. Xu from time to time. Mrs. Xu's expression was extremely ugly. It was dark and awkward. She was angry, but the words came from her mouth. She could not refute, even if she wanted to. You guys are really gossiping. A male doctor was annoyed by these young ladies. He could not help but spit. A group of young ladies. Seeing how handsome they are, they call each other husband every day. Do you have any shame? Let's go. All of you go back to work. Don't circle around here. Yes, Director Chen. A few young nurses bowed and went back to the nurses' station without delay. At the same time, they rushed all the patients who wanted to come over to watch the surgery back to the ward. Okay, let's go too. 2 policemen escorted Lin Rong, who was limp all over, and called the security guards. They also planned to leave. That person, please wait a moment. Director Li heard the voice and walked out a few steps. He wanted to express his goodwill to Huo Liancheng. Facing the police, he said, Police officers, our ward is also equipped with surveillance cameras. If we need to check, we will do our best to cooperate. Okay, Director Li, we will bring someone back first. Later, we will send someone to extract the surveillance cameras. The 2 policemen were very polite. They greeted and then took Lin Rong away. From the beginning until the end, Lin Lanlan's slanted eyes kept on Huo Liancheng. Originally, when she saw his handsome appearance and extraordinary temperament, she could not move her eyes away. Later, when she heard the few nurses' words, the shock in her eyes turned into jealousy and hatred. Lin Lanlan had been in America for so many years, so she naturally knew who Huo Liancheng was. What kind of wealthy family was the Huo family? However, such a man that all the women in the world craved was actually Jian Yun's boyfriend? No, she did not want to believe it. Lin Lanlan's eyes were full of unwillingness. Those strands of light were like poisonous snakes that entangled her heart. It made her hate Jian Yun even deeper in her heart. No, she could not tolerate Jian Yun having a better life than her. The suffering and humiliation she had suffered for so many years was all because of Jian Yun. She was clearly the daughter of the same father. Why were their treatment different from heaven and earth? Why did Jian Yun live like a princess in the past 20 years, while she was an illegitimate daughter who could not be seen naked? Lin Lanlan looked back hatefully, then turned around and followed behind the police. At this time, Xu Haiyang's face was ashen. He supported the door of the ward, his eyes staring blankly at Jian Yun's figure. That handsome face did not have the former high spirits, but only dejection. Jian Yun had changed. She had really changed. Xu Haiyang closed his eyes in pain. It had been 6 years. He thought that Jian Yun would still be waiting for him on the spot. With his understanding of Jian Yun, she had always been very stubborn. Once she recognized a person, it would be a lifetime. That was why he left so easily. Furthermore, the matter between him and Lin Lanlan back then was discovered by Jian Yun. Jian Yun family's matter was also troublesome. He thought that leaving would calm both sides down. He felt that as long as he came back and explained the matter clearly, Jian Yun would forgive him. But he never thought that Jian Yun would meet other men, and they were even more outstanding than him. Looking at her in Huo Liancheng's intimate manner, his heart felt as if it had been cut by a knife. It was extremely painful. Haiyang, are you feeling uncomfortable somewhere? I'll take you to the clinic. Mrs. Xu's expression was also very ugly. Originally, she found that the money on Xu Haiyang's card was missing, and peeped at his phone. In the end, she found that he had transferred money to Jian Yun many times, which made her very unhappy. Jian Yun's father opened a company in Boshan. He was still considered rich and had some status, but her Xu family was an official, and Xu Haiyang's father was the director. When Xu Haiyang chased Jian Yun back then, she was barely able to agree. But after Jian Yun's father's scandal broke out, Jian Yun and her mother were chased out of the house, and Jian Yun's mother was seriously injured and paralyzed. All these years, Jian Yun was the only one who took care of them. How could she allow her son, who had a bright future, to marry a woman with such a heavy burden? Chapter 128, Future Mother-in-Law. That was why Mrs. Xu had used every means possible to stop Xu Haiyang and Jian Yun from dating back then. She had even sent Xu Haiyang overseas and tried every means possible to cut off his connection with Jian Yun. However, when Mrs. Xu found out that Xu Haiyang transferred money to Jian Yun as soon as he came back from overseas, it made her furious. She came over and was prepared to humiliate Jian Yun fiercely. It also made her stop thinking about Xu Haiyang. But Mrs. Xu did not expect that her words today would be slapped in the face by strength. Not only did Jian Yun not ask for Xu Haiyang's money, she even found such a rich boyfriend. Furthermore, not only did he have money, he also listened to the nurse's words, as well as the hospital director and the old doctor's attitude towards him. She could imagine that this man's status must be very high. Mrs. Xu was embarrassed. At this time, in the ward, Senior Yin and Director Li checked Wu Yangfei's medical records and heard Baizi talk about the emergency treatment process. The two of them discussed for a while, but Senior Yin turned to Huo Liancheng and said, "Immediately arrange for a checkup. Although the situation is not optimistic, it is not hopeless." "Oh right, Liancheng, who are you? Don't you know Dr. Elson?" "George Elson?" Huo Liancheng raised his eyebrows. "Yes, that's him. He is the director of Joshua Hospital. He is also an absolute authority in the field of brain surgery. If we can invite him, the success rate of the surgery will be higher than 70%. Director Li added. Jian Yun had been tense since Senior Yin and the others examined her mother. When she heard them mention that Dr. Elson was the absolute authority, hope immediately ignited in her heart. Almost instinctively, she turned to Huo Liancheng and held his hand tightly. Her big dark eyes were full of pleading. Huo Liancheng sighed in his heart. Even without Jian Yun mentioning it, he would do his best to help her. It was just that he was very unhappy because Jian Yun would only be so close to him when she needed his help. "I beg you. As long as I can invite Dr. Elson, I will do anything you want me to do." Jian Yun saw that Huo Liancheng did not speak and thought that he was unwilling. She was so anxious that tears almost flowed down her face. Huo Liancheng did not expect to have such an unexpected surprise. He grabbed Jian Yun's soft and boneless hand and deliberately thought for a while before saying, "Okay." Jian Yun's heart relaxed and her tears immediately turned into a smile. Seeing this scene in Baize's eyes, his heart inexplicably hurt. "All right, then we'll wait for Elson to come. Liancheng, this normal ward is too noisy. Transfer your future mother-in-law to the VIP ward." Our new special ward is very good. There are still 24 hours of nursing. Elder Yin passed the medical record to Bai Zhe and said with a smile. Jian Yun heard that the conditions were especially good and knew that the money must be frighteningly expensive. She quickly waved her hand. No need, this place is quite good. Little girl, don't save money for young Master Huo. Ah, do you not know how much money he has? Come, let me tell you. Senior Yin was a naughty kid. Anyone who knew him knew that he liked to joke around. Huo Liancheng did not stop him when he pulled Jian Yun. He just rolled his eyes at Senior Yin coldly. However, when he heard Senior Yin's words, he was actually trying to promote himself to Jian Yun. He was handsome, and domineering. He was like the grandson of Hua Tuo, Yin She. The corner of his eyes twitched and pulled Jian Yun back. You old fart, you didn't dig a corner like this. Huo Liancheng said unhappily. Senior Yin just laughed. He saw Jian Yun was in a daze and worry filled his eyes. He comforted her. Little girl, your mother will be fine, trust me. At the same time, compared to the atmosphere in the ward that suddenly relaxed, the atmosphere at the door was extremely low. Let's go, Haiyan. She has climbed up a high branch and no longer looks at you. You better give up on this idea. Mrs. Shu saw Shu Haiyan looking at Jian Yun eagerly. Her heart immediately became indignant, and she could not help but feel sour when she spoke. Mom, don't say any more. Shu Haiyan could not take it anymore. He waved away Mrs. Shu's hand and turned his head. He glared at her with an unusually frightening gaze. He gritted his teeth and said word by word, Don't make me hate you anymore. After saying that, he ignored Mrs. Shu and turned to leave. Hi, Haiyang, wait for mommy. Don't leave so quickly. Mrs. Shu was shocked by Shu Haiyang's terrifying gaze. She suddenly had a bad feeling and quickly chased after him. No one cared about the scene outside the ward. Although Senior Yin and the others said that Mom would be fine, Jian Yun's heart hurt when she saw her mom lying there silently. Bai Zhe had already gone out to arrange for someone to transfer Wu Yangfei to the intensive care ward. When he was about to leave the door, he looked at Huo Liancheng and Jian Yun's hands that were still holding each other. He naturally knew Huo Liancheng's identity and knew that he could not compete with him, so he could not show his love for Jian Yun. He did not want her to make things difficult for her. However, Bai Zhe still had a glimmer of hope in his heart. He knew very well that a rich family like Huo Liancheng had always been playing with women. Perhaps he was only interested in Jian Yun for a moment, then wait until they broke up. Does he still have a chance? Bai Zhe had just left when he heard his phone ringing. Jian Yun's voice came immediately. Hello? Bai Zhe did not stop. He walked towards the doctor's office but saw a tall man walking towards him from the corner. The man was also on the phone. Bai Zhe vaguely heard that he seemed to be calling Yunduo. His footsteps suddenly stopped. Yunduo, it's me. I'm in the brain surgery ward. Where are you now? The man's voice was low, but it was powerful. It was unknown what he had said on the other end of the phone. The man hummed and hung up. Bai Zhe turned his head and saw a weak figure rushing out of the room. It was Jian Yun. When she saw the man, tears flowed out of her eyes, and she jumped into his arms. Jian Yun could not hold it in anymore and cried out involuntarily. It was as if she was releasing the pressure that had been placed on her for the past few days. All right, Yunduo, be good. Don't cry. The man hugged Jian Yun and lightly patted her back. He comforted her in a low voice. It's my fault. I'm late. It's been hard on you these days. Jian Yun shook her head. Just as she was about to say something, a big hand suddenly grabbed her arm and pulled her out of the man's embrace. She did not even need to look back to know that it was Huo Liancheng when she smelled this breath. Who is he? Huo Liancheng pulled Jian Yun behind him in a possessive manner and stared at the man in front of him with vigilance in his eyes. The man was in his early 30s. He was about 180 centimeters tall and had short hair. The outline of his face was very clear. His skin was a healthy wheat color. Although he was not as handsome as Huo Liancheng, he had a masculine aura. He was tall and straight. Even though his eyes were cold, his eyes were very bright. He was extremely attractive. Huo Liancheng suddenly felt a sense of danger. Chapter 129, Love Rival. Who is he? The man spoke almost at the same time as Huo Liancheng. The two of them looked at each other and sparks flashed. 4 eyes fell on Jian Yun at the same time. Let go of me. Jian Yun's hand was in pain from Huo Liancheng's grip. She shook her hand and tried to break free, but not only did she not shake off Huo Liancheng, but she was hugged by him instead. Seeing this, the man's eyes turned cold. A dangerous aura burst out from his body. Without seeing how he moved, he suddenly appeared in front of Huo Liancheng and attacked with a small grappling hand. Little uncle, don't. Jian Yun was shocked. She knew Ouyang Beicheng's skills. He was an elite of the special forces. He was amazing when he attacked. However, what surprised Jian Yun was that not only did Huo Liancheng not get hit, he even carried her and retreated. Let her go, Ouyang Beicheng said coldly. He made an attack gesture. His eyes looked like a cheetah's. It was as if he was going to fight if Huo Liancheng still held Jian Yun in his arms. What did you call him just now? While Huo Liancheng was guarding against Ouyang Beicheng, he lowered his head and asked Jian Yun while he was at it. Little uncle, he is my brother, my mother's brother. Jian Yun was afraid that the two of them would fight, so she quickly explained everything. Brother? Huo Liancheng raised his eyebrows. He looked at the man in front of him, who did not look much older than him. Although he was very confused, he did not hold Jian Yun tightly. Yun Duo, come here. Wu Yunbeicheng's eyes were sharp. He frowned and looked at Huo Liancheng. He extended his hand to Jian Yun. Jian Yun subconsciously walked towards him, but Huo Liancheng clenched her hand tightly. He's just an uncle. Isn't he interfering too much? Huo Liancheng did not have the slightest intention of letting go. Jian Yun could not help but feel her head swell when she saw Wu Yunbeicheng's eyes darken. These two men? Was there a need to do so? Yun Duo? Wu Yunbeicheng's tone became stern. If it were not for the fact that this was a public place, he would have attacked already. Little uncle, his name is Huo Liancheng. He is my boyfriend. Jian Yun saw that not only was Bai Zai looking over, but even Senior Yin and Director Li were staring at them with great interest. Not to mention all the patients who could move around in the nearby ward, she could only temporarily admit her relationship with Huo Liancheng. Otherwise, there was no way to explain why a strange man kept holding her hand and hugging her. When did you have a boyfriend? Why didn't I know? Wu Yunbeicheng was skeptical. Little uncle, come in and see mom. Jian Yun quickly changed the topic. She did not expect Huo Liancheng to let her go. She still needed help from him. She did not dare to get angry at him now. If they had a falling out, how could she have the ability to look for Dr. Elson? When Wu Yunbeicheng heard this, he knew that this was not the place to ask questions. Moreover, he had taken a break with great difficulty. He was worried that Wu Yunfei and Jian Yun would catch a high-speed train and rush over. So he did not hesitate. His sharp eyes flashed past Huo Liancheng. He strode into the ward. When Wu Yunbeicheng saw Wu Yunfei lying there silently with tubes all over her body and a breathing device on her mouth and nose, his eyes immediately turned gloomy. Yun Duo, what exactly is going on? Wu Yunbeicheng gritted his teeth and his eyes turned red. I'm not sure about the details. Mom's brain is damaged. Boshan Hospital doesn't accept it. She was unconscious when she was sent here. Jian Yun lowered her head and said sadly, there's a case in Boshan, but the surveillance is too blurry. I originally wanted to wait until Mom wakes up to ask, but today, Jian Yun thought of what happened before and was so angry that she trembled and could not help but cry. What happened today? Wu Yunbeicheng asked. Jian Yun's expression was not right. He deliberately ignored Huo Liancheng, who was standing there with Jian Yun in his arms. He asked in a low voice, when I just went upstairs, I think I saw that kid from the Shu family. Why is he here? I will go out first. Tell him slowly. Call me if you need anything. Huo Liancheng knew the relationship between Jian Yun and this man who gave him a sense of danger and relieved the sense of danger. But he also knew that it was not appropriate for him to be here. So he finally let go of Jian Yun's hand and lightly patted her shoulder. He turned around and walked bored. Instead, Jian Yun looked at Huo Liancheng in surprise. She did not look back until his back disappeared outside the door. Wu Yunbeicheng saw Jian Yun's expression. He narrowed his eyes and did not say anything, but he secretly frowned in his heart. He could naturally see that Huo Liancheng's background was extraordinary, so he was worried that Jian Yun would be toyed with. When only Jian Yun and Wu Yunbeicheng were left in the ward, Jian Yun told him what happened this morning. The more Wu Yunbeicheng heard, the darker his face became. In the end, Jian Yun could hear all the joints in his body making cracking sounds. My sister better be fine, otherwise I will definitely not let them go. Wu Yunbeicheng gritted his teeth and said angrily. Little uncle, Wu Yunbeicheng said, what have you been doing these days? You can't get through to the phone. Jian Yun complained. Jian Yun had been suppressing it for too long. When she saw someone familiar, her heart relaxed. She laid on Wu Yunbeicheng's chest and always wanted to cry. Although Wu Yunbeicheng was her mother's younger brother, her grandparents always came to have children. Wu Yunbeicheng was only 34 years old this year. Jian Yun was the same age as him. She had grown up with her grandparents and had a very good relationship with Wu Yunbeicheng, so she could not help but be intimate with him. Wu Yunbeicheng patted Jian Yun's back and said helplessly, there is a drill mission. There is no signal at that place. At this time, someone knocked on the door. Bai Zai's voice sounded, can you come in? Jian Yun quickly looked up from Wu Yunbeicheng's chest and wiped the tears on her face. She said, Director Bai, come in. Bai Zai led a few doctors and nurses into the ward. When he saw Wu Yunbeicheng, he kept staring at him. Jian Yun quickly introduced him. Little uncle, he is Mom's doctor, Bai Zai Director Bai. Mom's surgery was done by him. Wu Yunbeicheng reached out his hand. Wu Yunbeicheng. Bai Zai shook Wu Yunbeicheng's hand, but there was something strange in his eyes. He did not say anything, and Jian Yun did not care. Wu Yunbeicheng saw them push in and move the bed. He could not help but frown. What is this for? The hospital director ordered that the patient be transferred to the intensive care unit. A nurse saw Wu Yunbeicheng's handsome face and extraordinary bearing. She wanted to hit on him, so she quickly said, the intensive care unit? Wu Yunbeicheng had just finished his task and rushed over. Although Jian Yun had explained what had happened recently to him, she did not tell him everything, so he still did not understand a lot of things. When he heard that the nurse wanted to transfer Wu Yunfei to the intensive care ward, he could not help but turn to Jian Yun. You know what's going on? It's too noisy here. It's not good for recovery. Let's change the environment. Jian Yun did not know what to say and could only make up this reason. Ouyang Beicheng narrowed his eyes. There was a flash of thought in his eyes. Chapter 130. Women from the Ouyang family. When the doctors and nurses moved Ouyang Fei to the moving hospital bed and pushed her out, Jian Yun and Ouyang Beicheng followed her out the door. Jian Yun saw Huo Liancheng and Senior Yin standing at the window opposite the corridor and talking to each other. Director Li was respectfully accompanying them. When Huo Liancheng saw Jian Yun come out, he greeted Senior Yin and the rest and walked towards them. Little uncle, Mom can't perform surgery for a while, or you can go back to my place to take a shower and rest. Jian Yun looked away from Huo Liancheng and turned to Ouyang Beicheng. Sure. Ouyang Beicheng knew that the doctors and nurses were taking the elevator for medical purposes. He would only notify the family after they settled Ouyang Fei down. With Jian Yun here, it would be useless for him to stay. Besides, he had just started the exercise and was already here. He was really tired. Ouyang Beicheng did not refuse. He nodded and took the key from Jian Yun. He knew where it was. Jian Yun did not need to tell him. It was just that Ouyang Beicheng had just walked a few steps when he suddenly turned around and walked back. He looked at Jian Yun and asked, Yunduo, did sister spend a lot of money to stay in the ICU these days? Jian Yun did not know what Ouyang Beicheng meant when he suddenly asked this. She just nodded. Yes. Did you borrow money from him? Ouyang Beicheng glanced at Huo Liancheng. Huo Liancheng still had a cold face, but Jian Yun started to have a headache. She knew what Ouyang Beicheng meant. He was afraid that she would be with Huo Liancheng for money. Although this was an undeniable fact, she could not admit it at all. Otherwise, with little uncle's temper, he would definitely think that Huo Liancheng was bullying her and would start a fight with Huo Liancheng. Jian Yun lowered her eyes and stuttered, not knowing how to answer. In fact, in the ward just now, a nurse showed her mother's hospitalization fees list. It showed a balance of 1,080,000. She did not know when Huo Liancheng, who had been with her all this time, would actually pay the fees. The property in Qinghu City has been sold to an intermediary. When you get the money, return his money. The remaining money should be enough for my sister to treat her illness. Ouyang Beicheng said in a deep voice. He could not be refuted. Our Ouyang family does not need to ask for help. Little uncle, Ouyang Beicheng said. That house, it was your grandparents who married you. Jian Yun's eyelids twitched. She could already feel Ouyang Beicheng's displeasure. Did he see anything? It's still early to get married. We don't have a house, but our Ouyang family cannot lose our backbone. When Ouyang Beicheng said this, his sharp eyes looked straight at Huo Liancheng with a hint of arrogance. Little uncle? Jian Yun's big eyes flashed a few times and she was somewhat moved. She was thinking that if she returned the money to Huo Liancheng, did she not have to marry him? What are you thinking? Jian Yun was in a daze when she suddenly heard Huo Liancheng's voice. She raised her head to look at him. Under his lowered eyes there was an unfathomable cold gaze. His tone was very calm. The corners of his mouth even curled up, but his smile did not come from the bottom of his heart. Instead, it carried a trace of threat. Inexplicably, Jian Yun felt her heart tremble. She hurriedly shook her head. I didn't think of anything. That's good. Huo Liancheng smiled. He rarely smiled. He usually had a sullen face. Now that he smiled, Jian Yun could not bear it. Jian Yun quickly turned her head and did not look at Huo Liancheng. Instead, she looked at Ouyang Beicheng, who had been staring at her with narrowed eyes. She said calmly, Little uncle, no one forced me. I am indeed in love with him. When Huo Liancheng heard this, his eyes finally relaxed. There was a smile in his eyes, but Ouyang Beicheng still did not seem to believe it. Really? He asked. Really? Jian Yun nodded resolutely. She did not dare to tell the truth. She had not only taken Huo Liancheng's money, but she also had to rely on him to find Dr. Elson to operate on her mother. If she did not get along with him, where would she find the authority of the brain surgery? Ouyang Beicheng nodded and suddenly asked, Did he bully you? Jian Yun did not understand what Ouyang Beicheng meant. If he bullies you, tell little uncle. Ouyang Beicheng did not explain much. He just said that and turned around to leave. When he heard this, Huo Liancheng's face was completely dark. Ouyang Beicheng was Jian Yun's elder. He could not fight back. He could not even get angry. He had to leave a good impression on others, right? Jian Yun's mouth twitched, and her face was full of embarrassment. Ouyang Beicheng's words sounded as if she and Huo Liancheng really had something to do with each other. After a few steps, Ouyang Beicheng stopped again. He turned back and asked Jian Yun, Do your grandparents know about my sister's hospitalization? Jian Yun shook her head. I didn't dare tell my grandparents. I only told my uncle. Ouyang Beicheng nodded. Don't tell them for now. They are too old to take it. Yes, I understand. Jian Yun thought so too. Even though she was about to break down, she did not tell her grandparents about it. After Ouyang Beicheng left, Huo Liancheng asked Jian Yun, Do you regret it? Jian Yun knew what he was asking, but she pretended not to understand. She looked confused. Regret what? Huo Liancheng looked at Jian Yun, but he did not say anything. He just looked at her like that, which made Jian Yun feel scared. In the end, she had to admit, Okay, I admit that I was a little moved just now, but there's no use regretting it. Humph. Huo Liancheng snorted coldly and no longer looked at Zhang Yun. He took the lead and walked forward. Zhang Yun wanted to ask when he would contact Dr. Elson, but when she saw his tsundere look, she did not know what to say. Little girl, let's go and take you to our intensive care ward. Senior Yin walked to Zhang Yun's side and patted her shoulder intimately. He saw the scene just now. His face was always smiling, but there was a hint of deep thought in his eyes. However, he did not show it. Instead, he seemed very curious about Ouyang Beicheng. He started to ask around very much. Little girl, is that really you, little uncle? He looks so young, but he does not look like him. My grandmother gave birth to little uncle almost 40 years old. He is younger than my mother by a dozen years. This was not the first time Zhang Yun was asked this question. She did not hide it and said honestly, I see. Senior Yin thought for a while and then asked, I see that he does not look like an ordinary person when he walks and stands. Is he from the army? Yes, I little uncle am from the Army Special Forces. Zhang Yun said proudly. He often participated in international special forces competitions and won many awards. That's amazing. Senior Yin raised his long white eyebrows and looked at her with admiration. Of course, Zhang Yun could not hide her pride when she mentioned Ouyang Beicheng. Little uncle was her idol for more than 20 years. Zhang Yun was so excited that she did not notice that Huo Liancheng's face was so dark that it could drip water.